Hello my strong friends. In today's video we're gonna do a tutorial for the overhead press. I love the overhead press and I also love teaching it, so let's get into it. Overhead press is a great movement. It's a compound movement. It's one that we focus on Stronger by the Day, which is my program. It's like our fourth lift. So you got your squat, bench, deadlift, and then we add overhead press. Stronger by the Day will be also adding hip thrusts as a main movement to track and progress. I like barbell movements because you can continuously progressive overload into eternity, basically, until you stall, basically. Overhead press is a good movement for your delts, anterior delts mostly, your pecs a little bit, triceps. It's a super long range of motion, which makes it great in many ways. So let's get into the tutorial. Your rack height for the overhead press will be similar to where your rack height is for a low bar back squat. So this might be a tiny bit high for me, but my gaps are pretty big. I would just measure to like the middle of your delt. You next want to look at your grip width. I like to put my thumbs and extend them out from my delt and then sort of grab there. You might wanna go a little bit more narrow, but just outside of shoulder width will be fine. Now, a lot of people, you will see me especially, take a thumbless grip for the overhead press. I find that a thumbless grip helps me get into a better forearm and wrist position, but if you want to wrap your thumb around the bar, you can do that. In bench press, I'd never recommend that you use a thumbless grip because it can be dangerous. In overhead press, I mean, you guys are athletes, right? Like if you have it overhead and you fail a rep, letting it go will mean that it'll just fall in front of you. That's kind of annoying, but you're not falling, it's not falling on your body. Whereas in the bench press it is. So what you wanna do is kind of like wedge yourself into the position. Bring your elbows farther from your body. So you kind of want to like wedge yourself and kind of scoop under the bar. So elbows should be farther away from the body than the bar is. Should be body, bar, elbows are in front. So this will help kind of create a little bit more tension so that you're kind of scooping and wedging yourself in. What you don't want are those elbows and forearms pointing away from you. You want them pointing back in. So this forearm angle, you want it coming closer to you or vertical, right? So what we don't want, which you see often, is the elbows are kind of close to the body and then you unrack like this, meaning that you're gonna start pressing away from the body. We know from our other lifts that the most efficient bar path is going to be straight up and down, 100% vertical. That's impossible with a few different lifts, and with the overhead press, it's impossible because our head is smack dab in the middle of creating a completely vertical line. And last tip, when you start to wedge and kind of scoop under, is think about squeezing those pinkies in, like your pinky and your ring finger. Think about squeezing those in to sort of create some internal rotation and kind of create that tension that you need in order to stay tight. Another cue there is just think about kind of bending the bar. Now, you won't set up, you notice my setup didn't include resting the bar on your delts, didn't include resting the bar on your clavicle like you would in a front squat. That's because we are not pressing from a resting position. I want you to press from a completely activated position like this. So this is what you would look like if you're front squatting. You're using your legs, so the bar is resting on your delts. In the overhead press, we're kind of starting at a dead stop. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And I want you to have an activated position rather than starting resting on your delts. All right, so scoop us in, create the wedge, you've got tension. Now we're gonna just stand straight up, simple, tiny steps to unrack, similar to what you would do with back squat. The overhead press is a full body movement. You want to think about driving your feet down, squeezing the quads, squeezing the glutes. You'll have a little bit of thoracic extension in the upper back. So you'll have a little bit of this just to kind of scoop and wedge into that bar. But otherwise, try to think about tucking the pelvis under so that you can squeeze the glutes and then ribs are slightly down. You don't want to be fully extended like this position. Squeeze the glutes, tuck the pelvis under, and then ribs slightly down. Once your arms are going up, like I said, you'll have a little bit of that back bend, and as the lifts get heavier and as the overhead press gets a lot harder, you might have more kind of cheat. It might be necessary for you to cheat a little bit to get some reps that you might need. You're going to initiate by pushing the hands back into the bar. Elbows are forward, but as you come up, the arms will start to extend. My head is gonna be in the way. Beginners, this might be a little bit of a training adjustment to get used to this, but you basically wanna think about tucking the chin until the bar meets the eyeballs. After the eyeballs, think about pushing the head forward. I'm tucking the chin, bar passes my eye gaze, head forward. A common cue is think about pushing your head through the window. You'll hear a lot of cues, people will say, head through. So that will start to initiate your traps a little bit more and get you that last part of the range of motion. Anytime I give someone a cue for finishing an overhead press when they're starting to get stuck, I always say either squeeze your butt or head through. Sometimes both. Usually both of those cues can get you past the block that you're kind of experiencing, especially if you're getting stuck in the middle of the range of motion. A lot of people like to compare overhead press positioning with the front squat positioning, but it's really hard to do that because we want to be active and we're using obviously our upper body to get it overhead. So just because, you're used to front squatting like this, you don't want any of this during your overhead press, okay? So it looks very different. Other than the bar resting on your delts or clavicle, also you wanna keep in mind that your wrist positioning, since we're gonna push through the bar, we're generating force to raise the bar up, we want our wrists to be supported. So in my front squat, my wrists are cocked back, but in my overhead press, I want bar, then wrist, then forearm. So you'll have a little bit of a diagonal as you push the elbows that are forward as you push them up, but then you'll start to straighten up as you finish the range of motion. And that's because your head is in the way. Next thing, this is the point of contention, and this is something I teach the overhead press different than other coaches do because people on my program aren't ever pushing overhead press for a 1 rep max. So if you're trying to see what your overhead press 1 rep max is, you might not do this next technique, but I always tell my lifters that you should rest at the top and never at the bottom. You're gonna have to get over some inertia for that first rep, and that is where most people are going to get stuck. That first overhead press rep is gonna be really hard. Just like your first deadlift rep in a set of 5 or more is going to be the hardest. That's why I always say, unrack, get through that first rep, and then rest up here, brace up here, and then do your next rep. So I would do rep 1, Couple reasons why we do that is one, we're sort of cheating a little bit because we're using this as an accessory to push more weight, to get closer to failure. Most people will get closer to failure by that little bit of cheat because the range of motion in the overhead press is really long. I would hate for most people to get just stuck here, starting from a dead stop at every rep, meaning that they're leaving more reps on the table. Once they get past this a little bit of range of motion, that means they can do more reps for more weight. So the closer you get to failure, true muscular failure, is going to be the better when we're talking about hypertrophy. Since this is an accessory movement that we're not necessarily trying to get like 1 rep maxes, although sometimes we try to test our strength and see where we're at as far as training maxes go, that's why I recommend resting at the top and then going into your reps. That's a strategy that I use. If you would prefer to start dead stop every time, that's fine. A lot of people who don't like that tip, they still end up doing a little bounce anyway. So it's kind of the same thing. You don't need much equipment for the overhead press, nothing at all really, other than what you're lifting. But you might wanna consider a belt, especially because I already went over the bracing. So you rest at the top if you're doing it my way, and then breathe and brace so that you can lift a little bit more weight. So to help your breath and your brace, you might want to consider a belt. You can use anything from like a heavy duty powerlifting belt or something like this, which is just nylon and Velcro. Either will do, but if you're a brand new beginner and you're not sure how to brace, then you don't necessarily have to do that. It's just something that's a little more advanced that can help you. That's all for this tutorial, you guys. Be sure to check out my other how to lift videos. I have a playlist somewhere, I'll link it here. And of course, if you want to train with me, then you can run Stronger by the Day. It's my program that's only $9.99 a month. If you're more beginner and just learning how to lift, then definitely run my program Before the Barbell. You just find it on Instagram at Before the Barbell. We don't need anything from you in order for you to run that program. All of the workouts are just on the Instagram there. Super easy to follow, and I hope that means you'll be lifting with us soon. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.